George Harrison was the name everyone knew as the quietest and most thoughtful member of the Beatles. Most people remembered him as calm, shy, and staying away from all the crazy attention that came with being famous. But not many people knew that this quiet Beatle was once in the middle of many shocking love stories that surprised everyone in England. In one special interview with Rolling Stone magazine, Harrison talked openly about the women he felt angry about. There was an actress who left him with nothing, someone people blamed for breaking up the Beatles, and even a girlfriend who got close to his best friend right in front of cameras. So who did George Harrison dislike the most? And what secrets are still hidden behind these wild relationships? 1. Pattie Boyd, the first wife and the famous Harrison-Clapton-Layla love triangle. It all started in the summer of 1964 when they were filming A Hard Day's Night. George was only 21 years old and already super famous with the Beatles. He met Pattie, a 19-year-old model with blonde hair and a smile like sunshine. She was only in the movie for a short time, but that was enough for George to ask for her phone number. People who worked on the movie remembered that George barely talked to anyone else that day. He just kept staring at her and smiling. A year later, on January 21, 1966, they got married at Epsom Register Office with Paul McCartney and a few close friends there. The Daily Mail newspaper called it a dream wedding between the quiet Beatle and London's most fashionable model. They moved into a beautiful home in Kinfauns, Surrey, filled with music, incense, and laughter. George gave Pattie a silver bracelet, with words carved into it that said, "To my eternal love, P." At Taida, but being married to a rock star and a beautiful model was never simple. As the Beatles started having problems with each other, George spent more time doing meditation, studying Eastern philosophy, and recording music late at night at Abbey Road Studios. Pattie was often home alone, so she looked for company with artistic friends to feel less lonely. By 1968, the first rumors started. A music journalist named Alan Smith from Melody Maker magazine hinted that George was doing more than just playing guitar. At parties in London, people saw Harrison with Charlotte Martin, a French model who was connected to Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page. Even though the newspapers didn't confirm it, Pattie later said she often got phone calls at midnight where the person would just sigh and hang up. One time she found a train ticket to Paris in George's pocket with a contact name that said C. Martin. The space between them got bigger and bigger. George became cold while Pattie felt more and more abandoned. Everything finally broke apart one cold evening in early 1970 at Friar Park, the huge mansion George had just bought. Pattie came home early from Brighton and heard quiet laughing in the living room. When she opened the door, she saw George and Maureen Starkey, Ringo Starr's wife, sitting together in the dark. Pattie didn't say anything. She just quietly walked away. The next day, the news got out. News of the World newspaper ran a story called Beatles' Friendship and Secrets Behind Friar Park's Doors. George stayed quiet. Ringo left London for 2 weeks, and Pattie stayed inside, refusing to talk to reporters. In a letter to a friend, she wrote, "I don't recognize the man I once loved anymore." Right in the middle of all this drama, Eric Clapton, George's close friend, showed up. Eric often visited Friar Park to play guitar with George. Slowly, Clapton fell in love with Pattie. In 1971, he sent her the first recording of Layla, with a note that said, "I can't keep this inside anymore." When the song came out, everyone knew it was about her. BBC Radio 1 and Top of the Pops played it all the time. The whole world was talking about the Clapton-Harrison-Pattie love triangle. One night, Clapton came to Friar Park drunk. Looking at George, he said, "I love Pattie. I can't hide it anymore." George only smiled a little and quietly said, "If you want to try, then try." This conversation was later written about in the book, Here Comes the Sun, The Spiritual and Musical Journey of George Harrison. But the story wasn't over yet. In 1973, at a party at Ronnie Wood's house in Richmond, which the newspapers later called Rock's Fateful Night, Patty disappeared with Ronnie while George was seen leaving with Ronnie's wife, Chrissy. Within a few days, the Sun newspaper had a big headline that said, "The Beatles' wife swap scandal, Yutter." Even though everyone said it wasn't true, the media chased after them non-stop, even making detailed timelines of what the four people did that night. After this shocking event, Patty moved out of Friar Park, taking only a few things in their wedding photo album. George didn't try to stop her. He only left a handwritten note that said, "I hope you find the peace I could not give you." In 1977, they got divorced. Patty later married Clapton while George found peace with Olivia Arias. But their story, from that first time they met on a movie set to the legendary songs that came after, is still talked about today. Patty Boyd became more than just a woman. She was the inspiration for three of the greatest love songs of that time: Something, Layla, and Wonderful Tonight. She made George fall deeply in love, drove Clapton crazy with feelings, and left the world forever wondering about what really happened behind Friar Park's closed doors. 2. Yoko Ono, the only woman George Harrison openly refused. Many people think George and Yoko fought while the Beatles were still together. But the real big fight came in 1971 when George organized the concert for Bangladesh at Madison Square Garden in New York. This was his biggest project, both a way to help people and a way to show he could do things on his own after the Beatles broke up. While George was bringing artists together, John Lennon suddenly agreed to join, which made fans around the world super excited. But within 48 hours, Lennon's team added one rule: Yoko Ono must perform with him. To George, that was something he absolutely could not accept. According to Rolling Stone magazine from August 1971, the planning meetings happened at Friar Park. There, George made it very clear to his team that he would not let any drama take attention away from the charity mission. One band member remembered that George's voice was calm, but strong enough to make the whole room go quiet. Years later, producer Phil Spector confirmed that he saw Lennon walk out of a meeting after hearing Yoko was refused. Spector said George stayed calm, but his eyes were cold. From that day on, their friendship was damaged. Lennon felt like George was insulting his wife, while Yoko said he was stuck in old-fashioned ways about music. On the Dick Cavett TV show, Yoko hinted, "Some people say they love peace but can't stand women singing for it." Even though she didn't say any names, everyone watching knew she was talking about Harrison. The problems went back even further. Since 1968, Yoko had made the Beatles uncomfortable by always coming to recording sessions at Abbey Road Studios, sitting next to Lennon, and sometimes giving ideas about harmonies or song words. George, who loved having complete creative space, felt like someone was invading his territory. One EMI engineer remembered that George once left in the middle of a session, leaving his guitar on the chair. That night, he called Ringo and only said, "I can't stand this atmosphere anymore." People's opinions also turned against Yoko. Melody Maker magazine ran an article called "Yoko, the Fifth Beatle Nobody Asked For." Meanwhile, the Guardian newspaper wrote that George Harrison was trying to save his music from too many weird experiments. Things got even worse when Yoko and John released Two Virgins, which people thought was too extreme, and hurt Lennon's reputation. So when John demanded that Yoko join the concert for Bangladesh, George saw it as a matter of pride. He didn't say anything publicly, but people close to him said that the night before the final meeting, George sat for hours in his office, rewriting the artist list, crossing out John and Yoko's names and putting Bob Dylan instead. The next morning, news spread that John had pulled out. Headlines shouted, "Lennon pulls out, clash over Yoko." The concert went ahead on August 1, 1971. Tens of thousands of people filled Madison Square Garden. George led a group of amazing artists including Ringo Starr, Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, Leon Russell, and Billy Preston. No Lennon, no Yoko. But the concert became historic, moving, powerful, and unforgettable. Afterward, Yoko told BBC Radio 1, "George stole John's chance to show kindness." George at the press conference simply said, "I wanted people to hear music, not arguments." The fight came back in 1973 when George started his Living in the Material World tour. Yoko sent a letter suggesting a project called Music for World Peace, but George never wrote back. The Times newspaper soon reported, "Harrison says no again," with a photo of him leaving a Los Angeles studio. Rumors later spread that Yoko thought about suing Handmade Films, George's production company, for supposedly borrowing from one of her experimental pieces for the Time Bandits movie soundtrack. Even though it was never proven, the gossip made headlines through the summer of 1981. Despite the fight, George was one of the first people to arrive at the Dakota Building after Lennon's tragic death in 1980. He brought white flowers, stood quietly for a while, and left. A New York Daily News photographer took a picture of that moment, which was later titled, "The Quiet Farewell." The story of George Harrison and Yoko Ono was more than just a personal fight. It was a clash between two artistic egos, one quiet and traditional, the other bold and rebellious. That clash left cracks in the Beatles' legacy that lasted long after the band broke up. In the end, George seemed tired of both music and endless fights. He slowly stepped away from the spotlight, focusing on making movies through Handmade Films. But just when it seemed like he had escaped all the drama, he met another time bomb, not in the music studio but on a movie set. 3 Madonna, the nightmare on the set of Shanghai Surprise. After years of being exhausted from the music world and emotional storms, George Harrison believed he had found a calmer path: making movies. In 1978, together with his friend Dennis O'Brien, he started Handmade Films, a small British company that invested in independent artistic projects. No one expected that this choice would, a few years later, drag him into a real nightmare. It all started in early 1985 when Harrison agreed to pay for Shanghai Surprise, a movie that was supposed to be a big romantic adventure blockbuster directed by Jim Goddard. The story took place in 1930s Shanghai and starred two of Hollywood's most talked-about people at that time, Madonna and Sean Penn, who were newlyweds that the press called America's new power couple. On paper, the project had everything: a popular novel as its source, classic settings, A-list actors, and money from Handmade Films, which had already supported famous works like Monty Python's Life of Brian and Time Bandits. But only a few weeks after filming started in Hong Kong, things quickly went terribly wrong. According to journalist David Benedict from The Guardian newspaper, who was there on set, the crew worked in extreme heat with temperatures reaching 38 degrees Celsius. The schedule was constantly messed up because the two main actors almost never showed up on time. Madonna, who was at the peak of her music career after Like a Virgin, was said to act like a demanding star. Crew members remembered she often left in the middle of shooting, saying the light wasn't right. Sean Penn, who was known for his bad temper, often fought with the director. An anonymous cameraman told The Hollywood Reporter that one day Sean Penn smashed a halogen lamp during filming and walked away, leaving Madonna sitting in the makeup trailer for hours. On another day, a supporting actress named Freda Huken fainted under the burning sun. But the schedule wasn't shortened, because Madonna refused to reshoot scenes until she felt the emotion was right. Back in England, George Harrison got a bunch of worrying reports from production supervisors. At first he thought they were just press exaggerations, but when Entertainment Tonight aired a special show called Trouble in Shanghai, showing crew members complaining that the two stars are driving everyone crazy, he realized he had to do something. In mid-September 1985, Harrison flew straight to Hong Kong. Local newspapers noticed his arrival at the Peninsula Hotel, walking quietly with Dennis O'Brien. A staff member later remembered that Harrison came to the set very early, carrying his acoustic guitar and sitting quietly in a corner while the crew got ready. They said he tried to ease the tension by playing a few soft notes of "Here Comes the Sun," but it didn't help. The situation barely got better. After just 1 month, the budget jumped to nearly $12 million, which was double what they originally planned. Madonna and Sean Penn refused to do interviews while the press swarmed around them. The Los Angeles Times ran a headline that said, "George Harrison's film in chaos." A BBC World Service journalist quoted a crew member saying George was the only one calm enough not to scream. When the movie was finished in early 1986, the team felt relieved until the first test screenings. The audience reactions were terrible. People laughed at the romantic scenes, sat quietly through the comedy parts, and some even walked out. Variety magazine wrote, "Madonna looks stunning, but acts as if she's filming a music video," while Sean Penn seems angry at the world. Shanghai Surprise premiered on March 7, 1986, making only about $2 million against a production cost of over $17 million. Handmade films lost a lot of money, and Harrison had to personally appear on Good Morning Britain to reassure investors. Speaking gently, he said, "We just didn't have luck this time." But behind the scenes, friends remembered him feeling deeply upset, even thinking about closing down the company. One little-known detail. At the London premiere, Madonna showed up but refused to pose for photos with Harrison. The next day, the Daily Express newspaper had a big headline, "Queen of Pop Snubs, Beatle Producer." Harrison, according to a friend, only smiled and half-joked. Working with Madonna is tougher than touring with the Beatles. After that failure, handmade films began to weaken. But for George, the chaotic Shanghai experience didn't break him. It taught him a lesson about the darker side of fame. No matter how good your intentions are, just a few people can turn an entire project into ashes. But his storm with Madonna wasn't the last time he was dragged into trouble involving famous women. Before Hollywood's lights faded, Harrison had another controversial connection that was quieter, but sent the Western press into a frenzy. This time it wasn't with a pop star, but with a French model covered in mystery. 4. Maureen Starkey, the woman who shook the Beatles' circle. There are backstage stories about the Beatles that even the biggest fans have never heard. Among them is the story of Maureen Starkey, the seemingly gentle wife of drummer Ringo Starr, whose involvement nearly destroyed the friendship within the band forever. The 1970s started with chaos. The Beatles were about to break up. The four men who had made history together could barely look at each other. While John Lennon was busy with Yoko Ono, Paul McCartney was fighting legal battles over rights. George Harrison went back to Friar Park, a huge 19th-century mansion with rose gardens, lotus ponds, and even a stone maze. Visitors often said it was both beautiful and creepy, as if it was hiding secrets no one dared to talk about. In this quiet place, an unlikely friendship began. Maureen often visited George and Patty, saying she needed company while Ringo was away on tour. She became close to both of them, sometimes staying overnight after long parties at Friar Park. Friends, including Eric Clapton, later said that the relationship between Maureen and George became so close it was confusing, and it happened within just a few months. A former Friar Park staff member, interviewed years later in the documentary Living in the Material World, said he often saw George and Maureen walking together in the garden late at night. Just the two of them, when everyone else was asleep. Rumors spread, though few people in London's art circles wanted to believe that the quiet Beatle would go that far. But all secrets eventually come out. In her memoir, Wonderful Tonight, Pattie Boyd talked about one cold March evening in 1970, when she came back to Friar Park earlier than expected. The living room light was still on with quiet music playing from the old record player. When she walked in, she saw two figures in the corner, a moment that shattered everything. She said nothing, only walked away in silence, leaving George frozen in the huge house. The next day, whispers reached the press. News of the World newspaper ran a vague article titled, "The Quiet Beatle and the Lady Behind the Drums." No names were mentioned, but readers didn't need hints. Television and radio programs talked about it endlessly, while the Daily Mirror ran a special feature called Secrets of Friar Park, with old smiling press photos of George and Ringo. England was buzzing with guesses. The Beatles were already falling apart, but this seemed like the final blow. Ringo disappeared from London for weeks, staying in Monaco with Keith Moon from the band The Who. George buried himself in music and meditation at Friar Park. Friends, like Klaus Vormann and Billy Preston later, remembered that no one dared mention Maureen's name around George during that time. Years later, members of the Concert for Bangladesh production team said that in 1971, Harrison was still haunted by what happened. Backstage, someone overheard him quietly say to a friend, "There are mistakes you pay for your whole life." The friendship between Ringo and George looked broken. But strangely, in April 1973, NME magazine reported that the two met again at a small party at Eric Clapton's home. No one knew what they said, only that Ringo left quietly the next morning while George stayed in the studio. A year later, Ringo played drums on "Photograph," a song they wrote together which was a small sign of making up. After that, Maureen lived more privately. She avoided cameras, appearing only sometimes at Ringo's concerts with their children. In 1975, her marriage to Ringo ended. Magazines like People and tabloids like The Sun brought up the old scandal again, calling her the woman who broke the Beatles' circle, a label she reportedly hated until the very end. Even though the story faded away, its impact stayed. Friends noticed that George changed after that, more withdrawn, less cheerful, and careful about complicated relationships in the music world. One close friend said, "George wasn't the man laughing loudly in the studio anymore. It was like he carried a new weight in his heart." And yet, one little-known detail made the story softer. In 1976, after George was in a small car accident in Oxfordshire, the first visitor wasn't Patty or Olivia, but Ringo. They sat together for hours in the hospital room, saying very little, only sharing a quiet smile when the doctor came in. Maybe that was their silent way of forgiving each other. Still, destiny seemed unwilling to leave George in peace. Just a few years later came an even crazier incident that the British press called the craziest night in rock of the 1970s, the infamous Richmond wife swap scandal of 1973, involving George Harrison, Pattie Boyd, Ronnie Wood, and Chrissy Findlay. It left the whole nation buzzing. 5. Chrissy Findlay, Chrissy Wood, the most notorious wife swap in British rock. There are nights in music history that people remember not for a song, but for a mistake that turned everything upside down. One night like that came in the summer of 1973 in a small house on Richmond Hill in southwest London. Within just a few hours, it created what became known as the most notorious wife swap scandal in British rock. At the time, George Harrison and Pattie Boyd were in the most tired stage of their marriage. George had just finished promoting "Living in the Material World," while Pattie had started to drift away emotionally. The gloomy days at Friar Park felt strangely empty. Meanwhile, Ronnie Wood, guitarist for the band Faces who would later join the Rolling Stones, and his wife Chrissy Findlay were the life of every London party. Carefree, loud, full of wine and music, as if nothing in life was ever serious. According to journalist Nick Kent in NME magazine from 1985, it was Ronnie who invited George and Pattie over one weekend to relax. The party happened in a small bohemian-style house on Richmond Hill, where dim golden lights glowed through cigarette smoke and laughter filled the hallways. The evening started normally, friends chatting, glasses of wine overflowing, Eric Clapton stopping by briefly before leaving, while George, Pattie, Ronnie, and Chrissy stayed late into the night. Photographer Garrett Manowitz, who happened to be there, remembered that the atmosphere slowly changed from intimate to unusual. George and Chrissy sat apart in a corner talking about Buddhism and travels to India, while Ronnie and Pattie laughed together about art and fashion. Around midnight, the music faded, and the wine took hold. By the time everyone was tired, the unexpected happened. George and Chrissy left the house while Ronnie and Pattie stayed behind. A silver Mercedes car slipped into the night, leaving behind whispers no one dared speak out loud. By the next morning, word spread across London's artistic circles so fast that even Harrison himself couldn't understand how. The Evening Standard newspaper ran the headline, "Rock's Private Game, 4 Friends, One Wild Night." The Sun claimed someone at the party had seen the two leaving together. The next day, Daily Mirror printed a photo of Harrison stepping into a car at Friar Park, with a teasing caption, "The quiet beetle, no longer quiet." Fans were shocked, and the press went crazy. Radio shows, including BBC Radio London, debated the incident, calling it the scandal shaking artists from Soho to Chelsea. Handmade Films, Harrison's own company, was forced to deny the rumors, but the more they denied, the faster the story spread. Chrissy Findlay, a model famous for her blonde hair and rebellious style, was suddenly chased by the media. Melody Maker magazine from July 1973 ran her photo with the line, "The woman who led the beetle astray." Meanwhile, Pattie Boyd disappeared from London, staying with a close friend in Chelsea for weeks. Sources said she talked to Eric Clapton about it, and within months, she was seen publicly by his side, starting yet another stormy love story. Ronnie Wood brushed it off with a laugh. In a short BBC Radio 1 interview, when asked about the rumors, he said, "We're only friends, and sometimes friends misunderstand each other." But his casual words did nothing to calm the frenzy. Rolling Stone magazine ran a long commentary, calling the incident the intersection of love, rebellion, and self-destruction. The consequences lasted for years. George and Pattie's marriage officially fell apart, and Chrissy and Ronnie soon separated. In the music world, people joked that Richmond that night rewrote British rock history. But one less-known detail came out. According to The Times, weeks after the incident, George sent Chrissy a postcard from India, where he was recording with Ravi Shankar. It had just one line, "Keep your soul as free as that night." Simple words, yet enough to keep journalists buzzing. Years later, in his memoir, Ronnie Wood admitted, "That night we went too far. It was the crack that broke everything. I lost both my wife and my friend." And Chrissy, when asked in a 1997 Guardian interview, smiled and said, "We were young, foolish, and lived too fast." The Richmond wife swap wasn't just a tabloid scandal, but a symbol of how wild that era was. It showed how fragile the line can be between friendship and desire, between fame and loneliness, sometimes broken by nothing more than a drink and a glance. After the chaos settled down, George once again turned back to music. He left England for a while, flying to Los Angeles looking for peace among old friends. But it was there, in glamorous yet isolating America, that he met another woman. Not loud like Chrissy, not bright like Pattie, but mysterious, almost like she had stepped out of a sad song. 6. Charlotte Martin, the mysterious muse behind Let It Down. In the mid-1960s, London was a mixing pot of artistic dreams. Rock, fashion, and art blended into a free-spirited atmosphere never seen before. In the smoke, golden lights, and music at the Speakeasy Club, one face stood out. Charlotte Martin, a French model whose delicate beauty captivated Britain's rock scene. Charlotte appeared in David Bailey's photo shoots, was on the cover of Vogue Paris, and quickly became an inspiration for London's artistic elite. She was linked with Eric Clapton and later Jimmy Page. But what really interested the press was her quiet connection with George Harrison, the quiet beetle whom everyone thought was immune to scandal. Their story started quietly in late 1968, just as the Beatles came back from Rishikesh, India. George was deeply into meditation and spirituality, while his marriage with Pattie Boyd had started to crack. Pattie was busy modeling in Milan and Paris, while George stayed in London, lonely in the huge Kinfon's house, playing guitar through sleepless nights. One winter evening at an art party hosted by famous collector Robert Fraser on Duke Street, George met Charlotte. She wore a white satin dress with her hair in a bun and pearls around her neck. In the smoky, wine-filled room, she barely needed to speak. Her smile drew everyone's attention. Photographer Michael Cooper, who was there that night, remembered that Charlotte came with fashion friends while George arrived alone. They talked about meditation, India, and unfinished songs. When the party ended, George walked her to the door. No one knew what happened next, but from then on, Charlotte was often seen around Abbey Road Studios whenever the Beatles recorded. Technicians said she would sit quietly in the hallway, reading or watching through the glass as George played. Melody Maker magazine in 1969 even described her as the mysterious girl outside the quiet Beatles studio. Even though the article was quickly removed, the rumors spread. At that time, George was writing songs for All Things Must Pass, People close to him said many songs, especially Let It Down, had a new tone. Darker, heavier, more sorrowful. Producer Phil Spector later admitted to Rolling Stone magazine, "I don't know who he was thinking of when he wrote that, but it clearly wasn't Patty." Few people knew that, as the Beatles got closer to breaking up, George often visited Charlotte's small South Kensington apartment. Neighbors talked about a tall, thin man with long hair and a wide-brimmed hat arriving late at night and leaving at dawn. Descriptions that sounded exactly like Harrison. When Let It Down was released on All Things Must Pass in 1970, critics praised it as one of his most haunting works. But fans sensed something different. Lyrics that felt like confessions filled with regret and longing. Alan Smith from New Musical Express wrote, "This is no longer the George Harrison of the Beatles, but a man torn between faith and temptation." Charlotte never confirmed the relationship. She appeared at a few artistic parties, then disappeared from London in mid-1970. Her friend, model Jenny Boyd, later said Charlotte left in silence, as if she had never existed. But traces remained. In a rare unreleased recording, Harrison played a short piece titled 4CM. Beatles fans believe the initials stood for Charlotte Martin. Years later, close friend Klaus Vormann told BBC Radio 4 that George once spoke of Charlotte in a voice soft as the wind. "Some people appear only once, but they change the way you see the world." Those words, as quick as they were, revealed the deep mark she left on his soul. Later, Charlotte left England and lived quietly in southern France. Le Figaro newspaper tried to interview her in 1989, but she said no, sending only a short note. "I'm not anyone's legend. I only witnessed them becoming legends." The relationship between George Harrison and Charlotte Martin wasn't loud like Pattie Boyd or dramatic like Maureen Starkey. It was quieter, deeper, and haunting, like Let It Down itself. Sorrowful yet beautiful, bringing up the image of a man sitting silently with his guitar, remembering a French muse who once entered his life like the first breeze of spring. And that is the tapestry of hidden stories behind the life of George Harrison, the quiet beetle, whose journey was marked by love, fame, and complicated relationships. Each woman who crossed his path left a lasting imprint, whether sweet or bitter. What do you think of these secrets? Which story surprised you the most? Share your thoughts below. And if you enjoy dramatic behind-the-scenes tales like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next episode exploring the real whir.